you like to tell us a little bit about the exhibit?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the current exhibit that we have at the Jonesborough, Washington County Museum is called The Noblest Art, and it is a local look at circus history. And a lot of people are really surprised when we mention this exhibit topic because they don't think of the circus as having influenced Northeast Tennessee, but that wasn't really the case that we found, throughout the course of our research for this particular exhibit. And so we wanted to highlight and share that really interesting history that our region has with the traveling circuses that came through, specifically throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s. So the exhibit consists of 8 large panels full of graphics, full of amazing pictures and information about that, and each panel has a theme. So we look at, for instance, the opportunities that the circus posed for people. We also look at the risks involved with being a part of the circus. We examine things like the type of acts that happened, firsthand accounts of the performances that local residents saw. So it's a really dynamic, really fun-packed visual exhibit.
So how does an exhibit like this work? Because you said it's panels. So how does it work with panels versus having objects?
So obviously we have to interpret history with the materials that are at hand. And with this particular exhibit, we had a really hard time locating 3-dimensional objects that we could put into a case. And that's because a lot of the artifacts associated with local circus history were paper-based, so tickets, flyers, bulletins, etc. We were lucky to find a couple of local photographs, and we also used a lot of newspaper accounts, but those are 2-dimensional objects that wouldn't be really compelling in a case. So instead, we opted to kind of leverage the spirit of the circus, which was all about spectacle, gazing, looking, and so the panel format was a really good fit for that type of history because we can use the images in order to frame the story, frame the panels, frame the text that we have, and then also offer, some written accounts as well, or some oral histories too. So the panels just really worked out based on the sources that we had available.
Yeah, so when we're putting exhibits together, we like to have objects. Everyone likes to look at objects. The exhibits that we do that get the best response sometimes are like really object heavy. So if you don't have objects, like Megan said, having panels to kind of trick you into thinking that you have objects, it allows you to take something that's flat and 2-dimensional and would be very kind of like seeing the same thing over and over. It allows you to make it way more dynamic than it otherwise would be just having a bunch of tickets and papers sitting in a case. So this is one of the panels of the exhibit. What is this graphic, the excursion? Where did that graphic come from?
Yeah, and I was going to say, based on what you were mentioning just now too, this is a great example of an actual historic artifact that maybe wouldn't have been super compelling in a case on its own, because in the panel we're able to exaggerate the scale, right? So it allows viewers to really appreciate the details, whereas they might be harder to see or to read if it's behind glass. So this pamphlet came from the Wisconsin Historical Society. They actually have an amazing collection of Americana circus-related memorabilia and materials. So we pulled a few photographs from them. This is one of the few artifacts that they had. Again, they're very photo-heavy, and it is a pamphlet that shows railroad routes based on where the circus was going to be. So for instance, this circus that took place in 1925 occurred in Johnson City, and so the railroads advertised the departure and arrival dates from different nearby areas so that residents in Western North Carolina and in other parts of Tennessee could actually use the train to come see the circus. And this is an example that we see of folks putting a lot of effort into traveling long distances in order to see the circus. Some people have talked about riding wagons or mules over mountains. Folks have talked about hitching rides, walking and staying the night en route.
Yeah.
So this was much easier travel later on.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, this is an artifact. It's about Johnson City, but it's from Wisconsin. So how does an exhibit like this speak to it's a local history, it's sort of like a local history centered exhibit, but it talks about a lot of national themes. So how does that work?
So we try to take larger themes or events or topics pertinent to the world or to the nation and examine how that played out or affected our region in particular. Because obviously, the circus was a really popular piece of Americana, not only in the US, but throughout the world. And so, we didn't experience traveling circuses singularly, but we did in a very unique way because of where we're located geographically and also what this place is like culturally. So this gave us a really great opportunity to take something really well recognized and then examine its impact and its history and context locally. So that was kind of our effort. The archives for this were a little tricky because, as you mentioned, a lot of these pieces are in other locations. We don't have a dedicated archive specifically that's really collected a lot of these items. So we relied heavily on newspapers, for instance, so local newspapers would run advertisements, photographs, recaps, etc. of the circus. So that was an amazing local resource that we were able to use. And then we also looked at specific circuses, so like the John Robinson Circus has a really great collection, and then we tried to pinpoint local areas, Elizabethton, Johnson City, Jonesborough, Bristol, Knoxville, etc., for materials that they had in their collection. So we got very lucky in that regard.
So just how did the idea for Circus, like where did that come from?
So I don't have a great answer for how I kind of like not only thought of this, but then decided to actually do it. Because when you're brainstorming exhibits, sometimes you throw stuff out that sounds fun. I feel like that's always the phrase, that would be great, and then it never kind of happens. I wanted something that was different, really, really different. So in this museum in particular, it's very settler heavy. It's very kind of like what would be expected in an Appalachian museum. And so the idea is to shake it up by showing, not only a different time period, so something a little more recent, but even if you're looking at those 1800 years, it's different content, it's different history. It's not the same kind of narratives that we're used to, right? So the unexpected factor was really big. And then we're also seeing circuses in popular culture a lot. So for instance, The Greatest Showman came out a few years ago, which was an incredibly popular film, circus based, and we also see a long line of this with Water for Elephants, with other, with the Dumbo revitalization. So I think that the time was right, given pop culture's kind of renaissance of circus content, to revisit it from a historical lens.
All right, so this is the space that we are working with. So if you have ever been to the Jonesborough, Washington County History Museum, the main exhibits sort of go around the wall. And so we have taken great steps over the last couple of years to rearrange the space as much as possible. When the museum was put together, it was built to last, and not really be changed. So we've been going through some of that. But one of the things that we have done is open up the space in the middle of the floor, which is how we've gotten to this sort of exhibit that is now on display. So Megan, if you want to talk a little bit about how you can take a panel exhibit and use that to actually shake up your space in a museum like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So originally, for those of you familiar with museum design, or if not, this is what would have been a core periphery museum model, which means that there is a center, and then you've got, it's kind of like concentric circles, right? So the idea was that folks would move about in a circular fashion and consume all of the exhibits, et cetera, et cetera. So when we removed the middle, we kind of introduced chaos a little bit, right? Because according to museum theory, the idea is that you want to guide movement. You want to naturally create a path for people to take. So you're gently suggesting how they move through and experience your space. So when we took out the middle, we kind of removed that. It became a free-for-all. So you can just go wherever the wind takes you, which is fine unless you're wanting people to experience your museum or your exhibit in a particular way, and that's usually popular with chronological exhibits, for instance. So the panels here help to give a structure in a way. They can be challenging because they are 8 separate surfaces. So for instance, when we're conceiving of panel exhibits, and I'm sure Joe would agree with this, it can be hard to figure out how to slice up the narrative, and it's almost like creating chapters in a book, right? So it has to be self-contained on one panel on one side, but still fit into the whole.
Now one thing, just to interrupt real quick, we work with what we've got, so we have these are permanent, so we can move, they're not permanently stuck here, but these are ours, so we can move these around. So we know that we have these particular number of items that we can arrange in whatever way, like Megan said, to guide people to see a certain thing.
And they are movable.
Yes.
So that's the other thing. We're kind of limited by other factors, environmental factors, including light, etc. So depending on the conditions of different museums, you run into different roadblocks. But these have been fantastic for panels because it allows people to get up close and personal. And then how we organize and arrange them can help visitors not only experience this exhibit, but also the rest of the space.
This is our first episode about this exhibit. So if you have not had a chance, come down and check it out. Do you know how long it's going to be on display for?
I believe that it's going to be here for the rest of the year. So you have the remainder of 2021 to come see it. I would highly recommend it. It's very colorful. It is very visually interesting, and it's really cool history. Really, really neat little stories and vignettes that are pertinent to where we live. So it's really neat stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Be sure to tune in to our next episode, which will also be about this exhibit with some different things that maybe didn't make the cut or did make the cut and how that process happened.
More circus.
Yes. Thank you.